Our world, in all its complexity and wonder, has been profoundly shaped by forces both great and small. We often look to grand empires, epic wars, and brilliant inventions as the primary movers of history. Yet some of the most significant changes have been driven by an organism so tiny it is invisible to the naked eye. This is the story of a bacterium, Yersinia pestis, and the disease it causes, the plague. For millennia, this microscopic agent has moved silently among us, a hidden passenger on our trade routes, a resident in our cities, periodically erupting with devastating force. It is a tale of immense loss, but also one of remarkable resilience and adaptation. Our story begins in the 6th century in the heart of the mighty Byzantine Empire. Under the rule of Emperor Justinian I, the empire was a beacon of power and sophistication, its capital, Constantinople, a bustling hub of commerce and culture. It seemed the glory of the Roman Empire had been reborn in the East. Trade routes stretched from Asia to the Mediterranean, silks, spices, immense wealth. But these same routes carried an unseen and deadly stowaway. In 541 AD, the Bubonic plague made its entrance, known as the Plague of Justinian, likely aboard grain ships from Egypt. Ships fed the capital, but they also carried rats and infected fleas. Let us fast forward 800 years to the middle of the 14th century. Europe was a continent teeming with life. The High Middle Ages had seen a population surge, warmer climate, improved agricultural techniques, a relative absence of major pandemics. Great cathedrals reached for the heavens, new universities fostered learning, trade routes connected bustling towns and cities, wool markets of Flanders, banking houses of Florence. Europe was a hive of activity, commerce, and growing ambition. Life for the vast majority was far from idyllic. Most people were peasants tied to the land under feudalism, small, crowded villages, homes shared with animals. Hygiene was virtually non-existent. In the mid-1340s, the plague re-emerged from its ancient reservoirs in the steppes of Central Asia. It traveled westwards with Mongol armies and merchants along the Great Silk Road. By 1347 it had reached Kaffa, a Genoese trading post on the Black Sea. A Mongol army, stricken during the siege, catapulted infected corpses over the walls. One of history's earliest, most horrifying examples of biological warfare. From Kaffa, it was only a matter of time. Genoese trading ships fled the port, but they could not outrun the infection. In October 1347, 12 ships docked at Messina, Sicily. The townspeople at the harbor were met with a ghastly sight. Sailors were dead or gravely ill, covered in black boils. Understanding how the plague spread with such terrifying efficiency requires us to look at the disease itself. The Black Death was not one illness, but actually 3, all caused by the same bacterium, Yersinia pestis. The most common form was bubonic plague. This was transmitted by the bite of an infected flea. After just a few days of incubation, the victim would develop a high fever, chills, and, honestly, extreme weakness. Then came the telltale sign, the buboes. These were painfully swollen lymph nodes, typically in the groin, armpits, or neck, which would turn black as the tissue within died. Without treatment, which, did not exist at the time, this form was fatal in up to 80% of cases. A second, even more fearsome form was pneumonic plague. This occurred when the infection spread to the lungs. Unlike the bubonic form, which required a flea bite, pneumonic plague could be transmitted directly from person to person through infected droplets in the air, spread by coughing. Faced with a calamity of biblical proportions, medieval society fractured. The normal bonds that held communities together, family, duty, faith, family, duty, faith. The Italian writer Boccaccio described how brother abandoned brother, uncle abandoned nephew, sister abandoned brother, and often wife husband. Fathers and mothers refused to nurse and assist their own children. Those who could, the wealthy, fled the crowded cities for the isolation of their country estates. The poor, with nowhere to go, were left to die in their homes or in the streets. Physicians and clergy, the traditional pillars of support, were overwhelmed and terrified themselves. Doctors, wearing their famous beaked masks stuffed with aromatic herbs, tried a variety of useless and often harmful remedies. They lanced buboes, performed bloodletting, and prescribed potions made from ground-up gems or exotic spices. Many doctors, seeing the futility, simply refused to treat the sick. Communities tried to fight back. Some cities, like Milan and Venice, pioneered public health measures. They established rudimentary health boards, shut their gates to outsiders, and imposed quarantines. The word itself comes from the Italian 40 giorni, meaning 40 days. They created isolated hospitals known as lazarettos for the sick. When the first and most terrible wave of the Black Death finally subsided around 1351, it left behind a world that was both emptier and profoundly changed. With as much as half the workforce gone, labor was suddenly a scarce and valuable commodity. Peasants and artisans who survived found themselves in an unprecedented position of power. They could demand higher wages, better working conditions, greater freedom of movement. When the nobility tried to reimpose the old order, it led to widespread social unrest, major peasant revolts in England and France. The rigid hierarchy of the medieval world had been irrevocably broken. This newfound economic power for the common person had far-reaching consequences. Land ownership began to shift. Noble families who lost their workers could no longer maintain their large estates. This contributed to the slow erosion of the manor system and the rise of a cash-based economy. For some survivors there was inheritance of property and a surprising increase in prosperity. The authority of the church, once absolute, was also deeply shaken. Its inability to explain or stop the plague led many to question their faith and the institution that represented it. This disillusionment and the weakening of the institution's moral and intellectual authority contributed to a growing climate of skepticism and inquiry that would eventually pave the way for the Protestant Reformation. In medicine, the plague exposed the inadequacy of classical theory. Greater respect grew for the practical experience of surgeons and local healers who actually dealt with the sick. The Black Death of the 14th century was not the end of the story. The plague did not simply vanish. It became a recurring, dreaded feature of life in Europe, Asia, and the Middle East for the next 400 years. It returned in waves every decade or so, including the Great Plague of London in 1665 and the Great Plague of Marseille in 1720. While none of these later epidemics matched the continental devastation of the 1340s, they were intensely destructive locally and continued to shape urban development and public health policy. Cities learned from brutal experience, refining quarantines, health certificates, and sanitation measures. The crucial breakthrough came much later during the Third Plague pandemic, which began in China in the late 19th century and spread to ports around the globe. In 1894, working in Hong Kong, a brilliant bacteriologist named Alexander Yersin, a student of Louis Pasteur, successfully isolated the bacterium responsible for the disease. In his honor, it was named Yersinia pestis. Paul-Louis Simon later proved transmission from rats to humans by fleas. The focus shifted from praying and burning herbs to sanitation, pest control, and public hygiene. The fight against the plague became a fight against the rats and fleas that served as its vectors. This knowledge armed humanity in a way it had never been before, transforming the plague from a supernatural terror into a solvable public health problem. The 20th century brought the discovery of antibiotics. With the advent of drugs like streptomycin and tetracycline in the 1940s, the plague, for the first time in history, became a curable disease. A diagnosis that had once been an almost certain death sentence could now be treated successfully if caught early. While the plague has not been entirely eradicated, it still exists in wild rodent populations in various parts of the world and causes small, sporadic outbreaks. It no longer holds the power to bring civilizations to their knees. Understanding this history taught public health lessons that persist. It changed how cities manage disease, sanitation, and borders. The long shadow of the plague stretches all the way to the present day, its influence woven deeply into the fabric of our modern world. The social, economic, and political transformations. By shattering the feudal system and empowering the working class, it set in motion a chain of events that led to the decline of the old aristocratic order and the rise of the individual. The economic shifts it caused helped fuel the Renaissance and the Age of Exploration. Our entire system of public health is a direct legacy of the desperate measures taken to combat the plague centuries ago. The concepts of quarantine, isolation, and state responsibility for the health of the populace were born in the crucible of medieval plague outbreaks. Every time a modern government issues a travel restriction or implements measures to control the spread of a new virus, they are using tools that were first forged in the 14th century. The plague also serves as a powerful reminder of our relationship with the natural world. It demonstrates how a tiny organism, part of a complex ecological system, can have a profound impact on human affairs. It highlights our vulnerability to zoonotic diseases, those that jump from animals to humans, a lesson that remains incredibly relevant today as we continue to encroach on wild habitats. Ultimately, the history of the plague is a testament to human resilience. It is a story of almost unimaginable loss and suffering, but it is also a story of survival, adaptation, and progress. As we face the health challenges of our own time, the echoes of the plague offer vital lessons: the importance of science, international cooperation, and compassion in the face of crisis.